SIG webinar about how dreams do come true with a lot of work with Dr. Amy Morrell. Dr. Morrell is an associate professor at the University of North Texas, and she is very well versed in relational frame theory and acceptance commitment therapy. She has published over 35 publications on this topic, and including that, she's written 3 books for the public. So today she'll be talking about her process of designing and writing those works and what that looked like. And we greatly thank her for donating her time to do this today for the students. And with that, go ahead and take it away, Dr. Morrell.
Okay, thanks for having me. As Sonia said, the title of this presentation is Dreams Do Come True with a Lot of Work, How Becca Epps Emerged from Amy Rebecca Epstein Morrell. What this talk is going to be about is the development of the Becca Epps picture book series, which is going to be a series of 6 picture books, one devoted to each of the 6 core components or processes of the ACT model. So far, 3 are completed. 4 are written, the 4th is being illustrated. And the reason that I wanted to do this picture book series is because there are, I'm having trouble clicking, hold on. There are approximately 20% of youth in the United States alone who have serious mental illnesses. And only about 20% of those children and adolescents get treatment. And untreated mental illnesses can lead to worsening of symptoms, suicidal ideation, academic failure, and delinquency. There are a number of factors that can attribute for this gap between illness and treatment. Financial and time burdens, social stigma, conflicting cultural norms, and a lack of clinical resources. And of course, nobody can fix all of those problems. However, there's a good deal of research that shows that books can help with a number of those issues. So first of all, it's easy for many children and adolescents to gain access to text. And many times, youth can get books in their school libraries or their public libraries for free. So the time burden and the financial burden are easily addressed. Secondly, research shows that sensitive topics that many children, especially in certain cultures, would not find easy to talk about can be more easily broached in the form of the pages of a book. And when children are in treatment, there's also research that using books, sensitive topics can be addressed earlier in treatment than they would be through talk therapy alone, because guilt and shame and fear are diffused. There are a number of topics that have been addressed through bibliotherapy text. Some of the most common issues that children and adolescents deal with in their daily lives, but that they often feel like they are alone in their struggles with, have been covered in both books that are intentionally used as therapy resources and in traditional picture books that are just meant to be stories. So things like books about bullying, divorce, illness, death, conflict between siblings, and school fears, among others, can help children learn that there are other people that have struggles just like them. Further, when they see these characters who actually have common struggles with them, they can watch the characters throughout the pages of the book and learn problem-solving techniques. Also, children can learn skill development through reading books, and they can develop emotion labeling and expression, as well as critical thinking skills, particularly if they model themselves after the main characters. They allow for viewing of novel attitudes towards problems, and possibly, as research cited here on this slide shows, most important to ACT therapists, the use of books to address psychological symptoms promotes flexible behavior. There are a number of studies that show, even without a clinician involved, that children reading books that address common psychological symptoms and presentations reduces symptoms. And when a therapist is involved, what's commonly known as book work, supported by a therapist, reduces psychological symptoms in childhood and adolescence just as much as family therapy does. Furthermore, these gains are maintained for up to 6 months post-reading. Because a number of psychologists and other mental health workers, for that matter, know how useful using bibliotherapy or the use of text to address psychological symptoms can be, approximately 88% of psychologists report that they regularly use bibliotherapy in their clinical sessions. It is the case that people who work with children and adolescents tend to use bibliotherapy more than people who work with adults. However, there are adult clinicians who in these studies report using bibliotherapy, including even the use of picture books. So, since we know that bibliotherapy works, and that these gains last for long periods of time, and that lots of clinicians are using therapy books in sessions, it's really important to know what makes for good bibliotherapy. So what I'm going to do with the rest of our time together is walk through what makes for good bibliotherapy using examples from the Becca Epps Bending Your Thoughts, Feelings, and Behavior picture book series, and tell you how I learned this over the course of the last 3 years. The factor that makes the biggest difference in terms of therapeutic effectiveness is writing and choosing a book that matches the child. And this match is important on multiple levels. The factor that is most important is that the presenting concern covered in the book is relevant to the child. So if the book is about bullying, the child needs to relate to bullying in order for it to move psychological symptoms for the child. In addition to presenting concerns, demographic characteristics need to be relevant to the child who is either reading or listening to the book. Things like age and gender and race need to match from the main character to the child who is either reading or listening. And many times in bibliotherapy, the child is being read to by the clinician, or is being asked to read along with the clinician. So one of the things that has been long known, but has just been getting a lot of recent research attention, is that children of color and children of minority ethnic status are not very well represented in children's literature. And there's been a very recent push in my mind, thankfully, to include more children of color and more children who are represented in more ethnically diverse ways. Another thing that has recently become not known but paid attention to in the research is that children who are otherly abled or disabled have not been very well represented. Becca actually does have a visible illness and disability. She also has red hair, and redheads are not very well represented in the literature. And I did make a conscious effort. I don't know if you paid attention on that very first slide, but there were 2 pictures of me as a child, and you could see that Becca's emergence came directly from my redheaded and chronically ill disabled childhood. However, there are many children who will not relate to a white, redheaded, blue-eyed, disabled child. So I very consciously have used animals anytime throughout the Becca Epps series that a new acceptance or mindfulness technique is introduced. So this little picture here shows a bunny rabbit who is going sniff, sniff, ah. And that's one of the breathing techniques that's used several times throughout the series. Young children in the picture book age range, which is about 3 to 8, fairly uniformly and in a pretty generalized way, relate to anthropomorphized animals, so animals with humanized sort of characteristics. So I use Becca to hopefully reach out to children with illness and disabilities, and also redheaded children who have not historically been represented very well. But I also use animals to reach a more generalized audience, particularly when I'm teaching a new acceptance and mindfulness technique for the first time. The match of the child also has to be developmentally appropriate. And this is one of those things that's kind of like, duh, but also really hard to do. And it needs to be done in multiple ways. So the length of the book has to be appropriate. And for picture book range, you really want to shoot for around 500 words and definitely no more than 1,000, which is difficult to do when you're trying to teach a really complex concept like self as context, for example. Vocabulary needs to be developmentally appropriate, and that ties into reading level as well. So most of the time, as I said, these books are read to children in a picture book range, but you need them to understand, and you want them to have some scaffolded sort of vocabulary words so that they ask questions like, what does that mean? And ideally, maybe will be able to read it by the time they're at the end of the sort of picture book range at 7 or 8 years old. So you try to shoot for a 2nd to 3rd grade vocabulary level. And that's pretty well known in the picture book world. These books also need to have colorful pictures that are attention grabbing, but they should not be overstimulating or overwhelming, especially for bibliotherapy texts where children might be on the autism spectrum, or they might have sensory processing issues, or they might be anxious and overwhelmed easily. You should probably shoot for somewhere between 2 and 5 colors total, all kind of in the same palette. Primary colors are good, as are muted pastels, and that's what you'll see throughout the entire Becca Epps series. It's important for kids in the picture book age range, so again, 3 to 8, to be able to have some humor in their reading. It's hard to maintain the attention of children in this age range. So we want them to be hooked. Poop humor is awesome in this age range. And in Picture Book 4 in the Becca Book series, there is poop humor. You can't use a lot of sarcasm. You can't make a lot of puns because children in this age range developmentally, in general, of course, there are always exceptions, but won't understand that type humor yet. There does need to be an element of surprise, especially considering that these books will often be read over and over and over again, as all picture books are. A recurring refrain is a really nice thing to have for that same reason. When kids are read to, they want to be involved. And if they know what's coming, then they will be able to join in and read along. And that's really good for therapeutic purposes because it's calming, it's reassuring, and it gives them multiple exemplars of the lessons that you want them to learn. Having said all of this about being developmentally appropriate, it's really important that children don't feel like you're talking or reading down to them. So you need to not be condescending with your language. So you need to be clear, but not dumbing down. All picture books need to have a good read-along sort of quality about them, which means that they need to be good at being read aloud. To some extent, whoever is reading a book will have their own volume and pitch and pace, but words and phrases lend themselves to being read in certain ways. So if there are vowel sounds in the middle of words, assonants that sound well together, you want to include those. If there's alliteration, the same sound at the beginning of the word, you want to include that. If you can use a lot of onomatopoeia, sounds of words written out, kids love that in this age range. An example from Book 2, Becca Epps Learns to Be, that includes a really nice sort of up and down cadence and alliteration in it that every kid I have read this to so far loves, is when Tommy, who Becca has some struggles getting along with before she really learns to stay in the present moment, which is what Book 2 is about, is, "You keep quiet, especially you, little baby Becca." In Book 4, there is some onomatopoeia when one of the main characters, who is a parrot, makes a very loud noise, also using surprise, mimicking a pouring water sound, where he kind of yells out, "Blurb, blurb, blurb." And children love that sort of thing. They love to imitate it. And if you can use that sort of thing to grab children in just before you do something really, really emotional, which is exactly what happens in Book 4, it's a really nice way to kind of hook them in to a therapeutic lesson. Another really important quality of bibliotherapy text is that they have therapeutic exercises that are really effective, either built into them, which we're going to look at and even do a little bit of in a few minutes, or they have the potential for those things. And sometimes books that are just meant to be picture books that aren't even meant to be therapy books have great potential for this sort of thing. One of my favorite recent books that is just meant to be a picture book is called The Raindrop Who Wouldn't Fall. It's literally a book about the water cycle. It has no intention of being therapeutic at all, I can guarantee. But It's a clever little story about this raindrop who's scared to get dark and heavy and fall. And it is a beautiful, beautiful way to talk about depression and anxiety with children. And you can turn it into this nice exercise where you draw raindrops, or you make a model of a raindrop and talk about what are the things that feel dark to you? What are the things that feel heavy to you? What do you avoid doing because they feel dark or heavy, or what things are scary and so you don't do them, like this raindrop doesn't want to fall and he like clings to things because he doesn't want to fall. That book was not intended to be bibliotherapy, but I use it as bibliotherapy all the time because it has this great potential for that. Unlike the Becca Epps series that was very clearly intended to be bibliotherapy. And here's an example from Becca book 3, which is called Hugging the Hard Stuff. So Aaron is Becca's best friend. And he says, sometimes I get mad and sad at the same time. I start to think everything I do is bad. I get upset that you're sick. I get angry about bullies. I try to make my problems go, oh, what? And then there's a page turn. So there's this suspense. And you turn the page and surprise, the ball pops up and it knocks Aaron in the face. So in the back of the book, in what we call the back matter, after the story, there is this question that you can stop and pause and ask slowly and process with children in a very experiential way. It's a very intentional bibliotherapy exercise. Have you ever tried to push your feelings down? And then allow the child to sort of process and answer. Do they come back up like the ball? Do they feel the same or better or worse after you try to push them down? And I've actually printed this out and had children circle, or you could have them underline it too, and talk about that. Like, did they feel the same or better or worse? Because this book is specifically about acceptance, something that also follows just after that in the book is more bibliotherapy activities to show acceptance. This says, Becca took the beach ball and swam around with it. So what happens in the book is Becca realizes that popping the ball isn't going to help. And in fact, it makes her arms hurt. Pushing it down didn't work because that just popped up in Aaron's face. But if she sort of hugs it gently, thus the title of the book, Hugging the Hard Stuff, she can actually free up her legs and swim all around the pool that they're in and go and do things that she cares about. So it says it helped her get places in the pool, just like Aaron's raft did. Keys help us get places too. And then you can do the keys exercise with children where you ask them, what does this key go to? What does it unlock? Or what does it open up? Or what does it start? And if they say things like, oh, that's my mom's car key, or that's my dad's office key, or this is our house key, then you ask them to label those same keys with things that make them sad or mad or worried or scared. And you ask them to process, again, in a slow, thoughtful way, not as fast as I'm explaining it now. How does that make you feel to hold these keys, to carry them around? But then point out to them something like, sometimes we don't want to carry around yucky things, but if we don't, we can't go the places that we want to go. We can't get into the places that are important to us. And ask them what they think about that, how they feel about that. And say, do you think you would be willing to have all of your thoughts and your feelings to get you to the places where you need to go, or to get you into the places that are most important to you, like your home. So knowing that some picture books are meant to be therapeutic intentionally, but others are picture books that just happen to lend themselves well, it's really important to kind of consider in general what makes a good picture book. Some of these things we've already talked about because they overlap directly with what makes for bibliotherapy. The element of emotion, the element of surprise, having a good repetitive, read aloud or lap quality. So in therapy, a child's not going to be sitting in your lap, but they might be sitting down on the floor next to you or in a chair next to you. And you want them to want the book to be read over and over so that they, again, get those multiple exemplars. But one thing that we haven't said is that picture books kind of have a standard of 32 pages. So you need to have an interesting and unique story that's told in 32 pages. And that includes that back matter that we talked about, as well as the front matter. Things like, this is about the author, this is about the illustrator, this is about the publishing company, here's the title page, here's the copyright. So you are really not left with much of a layout at all. It's usually like 13 two-page spreads. Because of that, you need to have very well-developed main characters, and usually not many main characters. Typically 1, 2, sometimes 3, but there are not usually many characters in picture books. And that's important, actually. And it's really relevant for bibliotherapy because it means that your client has to relate very strongly to the, 1 or 2 characters that are in the book. We've already talked about the element of surprise being really important. And I did talk about not being condescending, but it's really important to teach a lesson without being preachy, without being overly didactic. From an ACT perspective, you would think that that would be easy to do because we're always talking about experiential stuff and metaphor. But when you can't be in the room with a client and all you have is words on paper, this is extremely hard to do. It's one of the 2 things that I still really, really struggle with. And we'll talk about the other when we get to it. One thing that we haven't specifically said yet that's also very important is that books are supposed to show and not tell. So I would never want to say Becca was mad or Aaron is angry. And this is really important specifically for bibliotherapy because we want children to learn about emotion. We want children to learn how to recognize emotion in themselves and in others. And if I'm just saying my main character is mad, rather than saying Becca's face turned red, they are not going to learn as much about their own internal experiences, nor will they learn how to recognize emotion in others. So it's a good picture book tip in general to write with descriptors, but it's particularly relevant for bibliotherapy picture books. Having said that, you can't be too descriptive with your words because you need to keep it succinct for picture book length, and you need to leave room for your illustrator to do illustrations without taking up all of their thunder. And so we're going to talk about how those 2 things really need to play out together. And a really good example, one way that I'm really, really proud of Melissa and I for working together is to show this right here. Again, still from Hugging the Hard Stuff, Becca Book 3. It says, Then she remembered pushing the ball down in the water was hard work. It didn't make Erin's problems go away. They got worse. So you can see that Melissa does not have anything in the illustration that overlaps with my words at all. And yet, it is a reflection of my words, and it is an age-appropriate reflection of my words. So she's got this elephant sitting on the ball and the water pressure going up opposite. And children can understand that an elephant is heavy. And that elephant is pushing down on the water while the arrows are going in the opposite direction. And that's not reflected in my words at all. So they're complementing each other. And that's a really important thing about picture books. Another thing that's reflected here is that Melissa has time, values, and effort. She has the rule of threes in her picture. All of us, all humans, not just children and adolescents, but adults too, respond well to the rule of threes. We like to chunk information, and particularly in stories, we like to chunk in the rule of threes. So in Becca Epps' storybook 4, which is called Bird on the Brain, there are these 3 main events that happen, and this is a summary of them. First, she did exactly what Stony said to do. Stony is the parrot that I alluded to earlier. His name is actually Greystone Epps, but she calls him Stony. Then, number 2, she argued with him. Then number 3, she stopped practicing her singing altogether, even though it is what she wanted more than anything. Within that overall story structure, which has 3 main components, throughout the book, there are also multiple other uses of the rule of 3. So here's an example, also from Bird on the Brain. Right away, Stony said, number 1, want a snack? Want some nuts? Which is number 2. Hungry? Which is number 3. Something that is really important to keep in mind is that young children do not understand non-literal language. Again, this is really hard for an ACT therapist. The entire book, Bird on the Brain, is actually a metaphor. Stony the parrot is a metaphor for Becca's mind. So the whole book is written with that metaphor. But within the book, I had to be very, very careful not to use non-literal language because young children in the picture book range don't really understand when you use paradox or metaphor or anything like an analogy, anything that isn't literal. So when I wrote, sometimes I had to go back, particularly in this story, since the whole thing is a metaphor, and think about, okay, let me think about my clients who are on the autism spectrum. Let me think about when my children were toddlers and literally erased things and started over or deleted on the computer. Another thing that's really important, particularly because children read and listen differently, and you have to think about both when you're writing picture books, is not to use tags inappropriately and not to over tag. And what I mean by a tag is things like he said, she said, they stated. So, for example, if you're writing about laughing, you can only say they laughed for basically ha ha ha. Like you can't say that someone laughed and then write anything else because you can't laugh while you're talking. And children want to, when they're reading, actually read tags because it helps them as new readers. But they don't want to hear he said, she said, they stated. after every sentence that you read. So you have to really balance that carefully. And again, that is really important in terms of perspective taking for bibliotherapy reasons, particularly if children have any sort of disorder that's related to perspective taking. This actually matters. So you have to be very, very careful with this. It is a balancing act. I think I've got it down now, but it took me a couple of books to get it. There are multiple structures in which you can write any sort of book, but particularly picture books. But almost every picture book editor that you come across will tell you, till you really know what you're doing, you really need to stick to a linear arc or a classic structure, which is basically what we have almost always called the hero's journey. So someone identifies what they really care about. Then they come in contact with a conflict. The conflict starts to get worse and then worse and then worse, and it's a rule of three. It reaches some sort of climactic situation where you think there's no way that this main character is possibly going to get out of this situation. Then they reach an aha moment and they resolve the situation. There is de-escalating tension, which then leads to their resolution. There are other ways, however, to write all books. For example, I See Me More Than One Tree, the first Becca book, was written as a concept book where you just focus on one idea and you tell the story until that one idea is completely told. So it was a self as concept book. I didn't know how to write that as a linear arc, and I tried because, like I said, all publishers basically say this is what you do until you really know what you're doing. So instead, I wrote it as a rhyming allegory, and I just told it till I told everything I knew about self as context in a developmentally appropriate way. Question and answer is exactly what it sounds like. One main character asks questions, other main characters answer. It goes back and forth until the story is told. Really classic picture book example is Are You My Mother? Cumulative classic structure. Classic example, is I Know an Old Lady Who Swallowed a Fly. Becca Book 4, Bird on the Brain, is a circular structure that has a linear arc inside of it. Many picture books that are not written well will start with one and switch to another. That is not good. You would not want to use that in a bibliotherapy situation. That is something you should look out for because many books do it and it's very confusing to children. And evidence actually does show that when picture books are written poorly, they do not help children as much with their psychological symptoms. But if you start with a structure, have another structure within it and end with the same structure, it's fine. So that's what Bird on the Brain does. At the very beginning of the book, Becca is standing in front of a poster for school recital auditions. And she's very excited. She wants to sing. Singing is really important to her, but she's questioning whether or not she's good enough. At the end of the book, she is standing in front of the poster again. She's feeling more confident because she's worked hard and she's done some mindfulness and acceptance work. And the end of the story, she's about to sign up and she's in the exact same place. Within that circular structure, and circle, it just means, start and end at the same spot, is the linear arc as well. Something that is very important, particularly in modern picture books, and again, very important for bibliotherapy specifically, is that children need to be the agents of change. They need to be empowered. They need to be given confidence through being the ones who move through that conflict and tension and working through anxiety, depression, not so that everything is all okay in the end. Like, for example, we don't know if Becca makes the the audition successfully, but we know that she signs up. So it doesn't all have to be like a happy ending, but what's important is that children work through the tension and the conflict and reach the resolution themselves. In modern picture books, adults are almost non-existent. And that is true in all of the Becca books. You'll see that on the next page. It's really important that there isn't some magic answer either, that children don't just all of a sudden go like, aha, and then know the answer. They have to actually work through the tension, the conflict in a slow, meaningful way, sort of gently over time. So, I'm losing my cursor again. That happened to me before. Let me see if I can get it. Nope. Sorry, y'all. I don't know what happened. Oh, there it is. Okay. I'm sorry about that. Okay. So, for example, in Becca Book 3, Hugging the Hard Stuff, this is the only reference to any adults at all. So the whole book is just Amy and Aaron, and the only reference to adults, and they're sort of off camera, so to speak, is there's this ding, and it says, soon after, Becca's parents rang the supper bell. Gotta go, Becca said. See you tomorrow. That's the only reference to her parents at all. And that's kind of the message throughout the entire series. So let me tell you a little bit about how I'm continuing to learn this stuff, because it is a lot. And then we'll practice a little bit. I took a sabbatical. I didn't, quit psychology altogether, but I took a sabbatical to focus primarily on studying children's writing and studying how to publish in children's writing, which is very different than an academic type writing. I took a lot of workshops, both online and in person. I became a member of Facebook groups where all of the content was like, how do I go about creating a picture book dummy, which is where you like lay out the content in the 32-page format, and similar things like that. I joined critique groups, both online and in person. I became a member of professional organizations just for writing children's book literature and studying children's literature. I even became an officer of a local board for children's book writers and illustrators so that I could network with people. I started doing peer review of other people's manuscripts and swapping manuscripts with them. Each of these icons that you see here are workshops that I did. And this first one, the Rhyme Revolution, is literally what I See Me, More Than One Tree came out of. Making picture book magic is what Becca Epps Learns to Be came out of. Even after doing all of that and having multiple rounds of multiple critiques of my work, I still actually, before I ever sent my material off to the publisher, sent the first manuscript, which was a rhymer, to an editor who I paid to look at the draft. And just to give you an example of how important perfect rhyme and meter is, what I sent to her from the first line of book 1 was, this is Becca who's brave, she's intelligent too. And I was going for unstressed, unstressed, stressed 4 times. And only one syllable stress was wrong, but it really changed the way the sentence sounded, because what that first sentence became was, this is Becca who's brave and intelligent too. The next sentence that's marked on here barely changed at all. It changed from when I'm sick, I can't shop, play any music or dance to when I'm sick, I can't shop, play my music or dance. And yet you could see that that subtle shift had 4 syllables that were incorrectly stressed in it. So even the teeny tiniest things can make really, really big differences in writing. And I think that's why people tell you never to write in rhyme, especially when you don't really know what you're talking about. I do think that was the first book, that each of the books has gotten better over time. Even when you do know what you're doing, being a good writer is not enough. You actually have to become a brand. Your character is supposed to have social media. And Becca does have a Facebook page. But they tell you in all of these workshops and in all of these books, because I've read empirical articles and so many books at this point on children's writing, that you should be tweeting every day, that you should be blogging at least once a week. And they'll even say that if you're doing less than that, that you're actually harming yourself rather than doing good, which is what I'm doing right now. I really need to get on that. I have not yet done a school or library visit with giveaways. I really hope to be doing more of that once I retire from academia next semester. But I have heard and read that they are very important for increasing your brand and publicity and book sales, and that stickers and buttons, like buttons that children can wear, are the most prized possessions, even more so than stuffed animals or plushies, but that kids do still get really, really excited actually from getting signed books from authors. And I do believe that to be true because I have set up banners and booths and tables at festivals and art shows, and people love that kind of thing. You can see up at the top corner in the pictures that I have made little hand fans with Becca's image on them. And on hot days at art festivals, they do bring people to the table. And then people will get kind of excited if I sign them and say, hey, while you're here, why don't you check out my book? And I do think sometimes it's led people to buy the book. At the very least, it's gotten people interested in checking out the website. And that makes people more likely to consider things like endorsements and reviews. The first book, we got reviews solely from people in the ACT community. And that's what you see here on this book. Steve Hayes, Kelly Wilson, Louise Hayes, Russ Harris, and also Mark Dixon, who is the publisher of the book series, wrote endorsements. But the second book, we started to branch out. And we got a physical therapist who is the founder of an organization called Generation Mindful, and also a special education teacher to read and do reviews of the book. And both of them really emphasized the whole body learning approach that connected the breath to the present moment and to the self and to other people. And so I thought maybe we could practice that a little bit. So one way to do that is to focus on that bunny breath that I introduced a little while ago. So this is what the bunny does. It takes 2 short breaths in through his nose and then a long, deep breath out from his mouth, just like this. Now, I can't see any of you, but hopefully you'll play along and go. One more time. This time, maybe notice that when you breathe in through your nose, the temperature of your breath is a little bit cooler than when you breathe out from your mouth. One of the things that we say to kids is also that you can really pay attention to how your belly changes when you do the big, long breath out from your mouth. So I'll do it one more time, and you can do it with me if you want. Maybe put your hand on your belly. Also, in the back of Becca Epps Learns to Be, it says yoga exercises are a great way to make contact with the present moment. Sometimes making stories that integrates poses helps children feel more comfortable. In Becca's story, there is a willow tree. Let's do tree pose together. You don't have to do it right now. In the actual text itself, there is a page where Becca talks about the stoplight practice that she says her teacher, Mrs. Niebaum, taught. And Mrs. Niebaum is featured in book 2, as is Becca's mom. So there's a place where adults are pictured. It says, at the red light, you stop, listen for the smallest sound, and take a deep breath. At the yellow light, you think about all of your choices for your next action. And then only after you have done those 2 things do you go on to the green light and take an action. One of my favorite activities from all of the Becca Epps series is from book 1, I See Me, More Than One Tree, where children learn to recognize that they are the forest. And I have done this with children as young as 3, and it worked. And I've done it with adult clients, and it worked. And I've done it with everyone in between. The only person who balked at all was a middle schooler, and middle schoolers are tough. I won't read this entire thing because it's a little long and we're starting to push a bit on time. But the idea is that you walk through with clients that there are lots of things in a forest, big things, little things, things that come and go, but that they are the forest. And it ends with saying that an annoying hiccup could be like a mosquito flying around. Oh, I'm moving my hand. There you go. And that's just sort of annoying, but it's tiny and small, and it comes and goes. A death of a loved one might be something like really big, like a big moose that's in the forest. But still, that's just something that's in the forest, but they are the forest. And leaves change in the forest, and lakes, get deeper and they evaporate. But the forest itself is stable and ever present. And with the 3-year-old, I actually did have a big green poster board, and I came in with cutouts of animals and trees and lakes and rocks, and we labeled on the actual things that I brought in, thoughts and feelings and bodily sensations and memories and experiences. And I do think that helped make it more concrete and be more understandable. But she absolutely got it, and it was very powerful for her. The last thing that I want to do here is show a quick trailer because, always leave them wanting to buy. It says coming soon, but the good news is that actually this book has been out for a while, and you can buy it either from Shawnee Scientific Press or from the Becca Facebook page. So let's go back to this slide, and I will go ahead and start the movie. Maybe. Oh, maybe not. Darn, it looks like it's not playing. Well, shoot. Okay. Well, it looks like it's not going to play. So instead, I will just go ahead and move to this and leave the last 6 minutes or so for questions or comments. Thank you all so much.
Thank you, Amy. If anyone has any questions, you can feel free to type them into the chat box. Someone is typing, so we'll give it a couple minutes.
Okay. While we're waiting for someone to type, I should say that on this last slide, pictured with me is the illustrator of the series, Melissa Londoño Connolly. She was my former student, and now she is a licensed psychologist herself in Colorado.
Inez asks, did you consider animal characters instead of children?
There are a couple of animal characters. In the first book, there is an owl that is a main character, and then as we've talked about a couple of times, in the second and third book, there is a bunny that is a main character. But as far as the main character in the series, it was definitely going to be Becca from the very beginning. Becca was going to be a representation, basically, of me. I felt like, for the reason that I said at the very beginning, that a redheaded child with a chronic illness needed to be represented just because that had not been done enough.
That's actually something I was thinking about when you were speaking, Amy, because I know that this book is kind of a representation of you. What's it like having sort of this piece of you out there and then using that to then connect with other children and help them through similar processes?
It's been really very powerful, actually. Because, and I do see the question about publishers, and I'll come back to that. As far as the working with other children, it's been very, or working with children, but it is so much a representation of my childhood. It's been very powerful. Kids really, really relate to Becca. Even children who don't look at all like Becca. I think partially because I did very carefully use animals whenever a new technique is introduced. But people will say things like, "Oh, I also get sad when I feel bad." Do you think that Becca is sad because she's sick, or do you think she's sad because her friends don't like her? I mean, and that's so not at all the book, it's not in the book at all. And that was never my experience. But it will open up really, really good clinical conversations. I just had a client last week who read it, who actually is a 14-year-old male adolescent with a lot of trauma, and which again was not my experience, but who read it as if everything about Becca was related to a horrific trauma history. And that's just how he related to it. And I thought it was incredible, because I think, they just interpret it through whatever their filter is. So it's been really powerful for me. And it actually it hasn't occurred to me as if it's about me, even though it is, if that makes sense. And with respect to the publishers, I sent the first book to many, many, many people who rejected it. And I think it is because they just had no clue what I was trying to do. Now, I also think that initially it wasn't great. And so the first couple of times I sent it, it really wasn't very good. And I do think it got better, and people just had no clue what I was trying to do. And I had one publisher flat out say, this is too morbid. Nobody wants to read about a child who's chronically ill and sad. And I said, you just don't understand. Like at the end, it literally ends with her saying she and everyone else in the world is whole, complete, and perfect. I mean, it has an incredibly uplifting story ending, but they just did not get it. So I ended up just sending it to people after that point who had who were psychological companies.
All right. Well, thanks for that and for sharing, Amy. It's really cool to see something that is related to what we do in a way to like disseminate that to the public, and also a tool for clinicians as well. And so we are at time. I think what I'll do is this will be recorded and sent out, and I'll make sure that we send out your trailer as well so people can see that. Thank you so much for taking the time today.
Yeah, of course. Thank you all.